Hi, friends. How are you guys?
Hi, wonderful. How about you all?
Hey, João, hey,
I'm
Norah.
fine. Hi, bro.
All
So, guys, we're here for day 18 of Paul and Stephen. We're very, very happy with this book. Tonight, we're starting chapter 3. We have loads of interesting things to talk about tonight, as always. And before we start properly talking about the book, our great friend Norah here will bring us some prayer so we can get more relaxed, more focused, and then start talking about the book without any further ado.
right. Let us close our eyes if it's in our alignment, or just simply tune into this energy, asking the spirits, God, and all the wonderful energy to come and inspire us as we're doing this study. That there's droplets of hope and faith and love that surround us today and penetrate into our hearts. That you guide us, dear Lord, and anybody that is needing a message of peace, that they receive their message. With that, we say a Hail Mary prayer. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. With that, we kindly ask permission to begin, and so be it.
So big. Thank you, dear. Beautiful prayer. Thank you so much. So, guys, we are positioned in the second part of the book, and tonight we're going to start chapter 3. Chapter 3 has the title Struggle and Humiliation. So, here's the text. The journey went smoothly. However, in his new solitude, Saul realized that invisible powers were conferring lofty and consoling inspiration on his mind. In the startful night, he had the feeling he was hearing a loving and wise voice expressing itself through appeals of infinite love and hope. From the moment he parted ways with Aquila and his wife, loving company, and felt completely alone for the great undertaking of his new destiny, he had found an unexpected inner strength unknown to him before. He could not define that spiritual state, but the fact was that Stephen remained nearby as a loyal companion under Jesus' guidance from then on. Those exhortations, those gentle and friendly voices that were to assist him throughout his whole apostolic journey, and which he attributed directly to the Savior, in fact, came from the kind hearted martyr of the way. Stephen would follow him in the spirit for 30 years. This is so beautiful, guys. Continually renewing his strength as he carried out the redemptive task of the gospel. In this way, Jesus willed for the first victim of the Jerusalem persecutions to remain forever united to the first executioner of the converts to his doctrine of life and redemption. This is powerful. Instead of sentiments of remorse and perplexity due to his blameful past and the longing and discouragement that he had sometimes threatening his soul, he now felt radiant promises within his renewed spirit, even though could not explain the sacred origin of such profound hopes. In spite of the remarkable philosophical changes, physiological changes that the life, discipline, and climate of the desert had wrought on him, he entered Damascus with sincere joy in his soul, now completely devoted to Jesus' service. With unspeakable joy, Saul embraced old Ananias and filled him in on his spiritual progress. The venerable elder returned his affection with immense kindness. This time, the former rabbi had no need to isolate himself in an inn amongst people he did not know, because the brethren of the way offered him open and loving hospitality. The comforting emotion of the first meeting he had attended before retiring into the desert was repeated daily. The small fraternal congregation gathered every night to exchange new thoughts on Christ's teachings, to comment on worldly events in light of the gospel, and to exchange objectives and conclusions. Saul was told all the news regarding the doctrine, which was now experiencing the initial effects of the clash between the Jews and the friends of Christ over the issue of circumcision. His passionate temperament sensed the extent of the task reserved for him. The conventionalist Pharisees of the synagogues were no longer opposed to the activities of the way, provided that Jesus' followers were, before anything else, faithful observers of Moses' principles. Only Ananias and a few others perceived the subtlety of the casuists, who were deliberately provoking confusion far and wide, thereby hindering the victorious progress of the redemptive good news. The ex-doctor of the law realized that in his absence, the persecution process had become more insidious and imperceptible, that the cruel but open nature of the initial movement had given way to manifestations of Pharisaic hypocrisy, which, under the pretext of acquiescence and benevolence, actually immersed the personality of Jesus and the grandeur of his divine lessons in a criminal and deliberate oblivion. Consistent with the, guys, this is a very important part of the book for us to understand why Saul of Tarsus and afterward Paul of Tarsus is so important. Consistent with the new disposition of his conscience, Saul had not intended to return to Damascus synagogue because he did not want to look like a pretentious teacher fighting for the salvation of others before attending to his own betterment. However, in light of what he was seeing and gathering with his acute psychological perception, he understood that it would be useful to face all the consequences and point out the disparities between Pharisaic formalism and the gospel regarding what circumcision was and what the new faith was. Upon revealing to Ananias his plan to foment discussion on the subject, the kind old man encouraged his intention to reestablish the truth on its real fundamentals. To that end, on the second Sabbath of his stay in the city, the stalwart preacher went to the synagogue. No one recognized the rabbi from Tarsus in his threadbare tunic with his suntan skin, his thin face, and the lively glow in his deep eyes. Once the traditional reading and commentary were over and the floor was given to sincere scholars of the religion, the unknown man ascended the platform of the matters of Israel. Seeking to win the interest of the large assembly, he spoke first of the sacred character of the law of Moses, discoursing passionately on the wonderful and wise promises of Isaiah before embarking upon the study of the prophets. Very smart. Those present listened to him with profound attention. Some made an effort to identify that somehow strangely familiar voice. His vibrant preaching led to far reaching and beautiful conclusions. Immersed spiritual light overflowed from his rapturous words. The former rabbi realized the magnetic power he now held over the large audience and began to speak of the Nazarene Messiah, comparing his life, deeds, and teachings with the texts in the sacred writings that had announced his coming. When he raised the problem of circumcision, the assembly broke into a furious uproar. It's him. "It's the traitor," exclaimed the most insolent after recognizing the former doctor of Jerusalem. "Stone the blasphemer. It's the outlaw from the sect of the Way." The leaders of the religious service recognized their former colleague. He was now considered a dazard of the law and subject to severe and cruel punishment. Saul was witnessing a repetition of the same scene that had occurred when he spoke to the selective meeting of the Levites from Cyprus. He faced the situation impassively until the religious authorities managed to calm the turbulent crowd. After the most acute phase of the commotion, the head of the synagogue stood up and ordered Saul to step down from the platform to answer his questions. The Damascus convert understood at a glance that he would have to remain fully composed if he wanted to emerge successfully from this ordeal, so he obeyed readily without any protest. "Are you Saul of Tarsus, the former rabbi of Jerusalem?" asked the authority emphatically. "Yes, by the grace of Christ Jesus," he answered firmly and resolutely. References to the carpenter of Nazareth are of no importance at the moment. We are interested only in your immediate arrest, in accordance with instructions received from the temple, explained the Jewish leader solemnly. "My arrest?" asked Saul, surprised. "Yes, I do not acknowledge your right to arrest me," said the preacher. In the face of such a firm reply, there was a general gasp of amazement. "Why resist? You need only obey." Saul of Tarsus looked at him squarely. "I refuse, because in spite of having changed my religious concepts, I am still a doctor of the law. And furthermore, on political grounds, I am a Roman citizen and do not have to comply with verbal arrest orders. But you are being arrested in the name of the Sanhedrin. Where is the warrant?" This unexpected question bewildered the priest. The official document had indeed arrived from Jerusalem over 2 years ago, but nobody could have foreseen this incident. The writ had been filed away carefully, but could not be presented right away, as the circumstances now required. "The preachment will be presented within a few hours," added the leader of the synagogue, somewhat unsure of the fact. And as if to justify himself, he added, "We have had orders from Jerusalem to arrest you ever since the scandal of your last sermon here in Damascus." Saul looked him in the eye, and addressing the assembly, which, surprised and marveling, had taken note of his moral courage, he stated loudly and clearly, "Men of Israel, I have brought to your souls the best I have to offer, but you refuse the truth, exchanging it for outward formalities. I do not condemn you. I feel sorry for you, because I too used to be as you are. However, when my time came, I did not refuse the generous help that heaven offered me. You hurl accusations against me, and you reproach the religious convictions I now hold. But who among you is willing to discuss them with me? Who, in the sincere warrior of the spiritual arena, who wishes to probe the Holy Scriptures with me?" A deep silence followed. "Nobody?" asked the ardent artisan of the new faith with a triumphant smile. "I know you, because I too have trod such paths. However, let us admit that Pharisaism has caused our loss by casting our most sacred hopes into an ocean of hypocrisy. You revere Moses in the synagogue. You are excessively careful with outward conventions, but what is the state of your home life? How much heartache you hide under your immaculate tunics? How many wounds you disguise with deceitful words? Like me, you should feel immense disgust with so many ignoble pretenses. if we were to point out the sinful acts that are practiced in the shadow of the law, we would have neither whips enough to punish the guilty nor the exact number of curses required for such abominations. I too suffered your sickness. I too poisoned myself in the same darkness, but I have come here to bring you the vital remedy. You deny me your fraternal support. However, in vain you resist the processes of regeneration, for only Jesus can save us. I have brought you the gospel. I have offered you the door of redemption for our old blemishes, and you want to repay my efforts with prison and curses. I refuse to receive such pay in exchange for having come here voluntarily. You cannot arrest me, for the word of God is not bound by shackles. If you yourselves reject it, there are others who will understand me. It would not be right to surrender myself to your caprices when the work I must do requires my dedication and goodwill. Even the leaders of the meeting seemed spellbound by powerful and inexplicable magnetic powers. Guy, I finished here and I passed to Daniel, and I want to apologize because there's a party nearby and they are very loud. I don't know if you guys could hear it. Thank the Lord, but I'm here. Very loud here, but thank the Lord it did not bother you guys.
No, João, it's just fine. We just heard you. No party at all. So continuing, Saul looked intently at them one by one, revealing them the strength of his powerful character. Your silence speaks louder than words, he concluded almost daringly. Jesus will not permit you to arrest his humble and loyal servant. May his blessings enlighten your minds with the true understanding of life's realities. Having said that, he walked resolutely toward the door as he startled, uh, as the startled assembly watched him until, with a firm step, he disappeared into one of the narrow streets leading to the large square. As if awakening from the daring challenge, the meeting degenerated into heated argument. The chief priest seemed extremely impressed with Saul's statements and could not conceal his indecisiveness. Well, that's a that's a tough word. Sorry. Struggling between Saul's bitter truth and the order for his immediate arrest. His more strong-willed colleagues tried to boost his sense of authority. This brazen preacher had to be arrested at any cost. The more resolute began looking immediately for the parchment from Jerusalem, and as soon as they found it, they decided to request help from the civilian authorities and asked for their immediate attention to the matter. Within 3 hours, all measures for the arrest of the audacious preacher were in place. The first contingents were placed at the various city gates. In order to prevent any attempt at escape, a small group of Pharisees and 2 soldiers were posted by each one. Next, they started a mass search of the homes of all sympathetic persons suspected of having links with the disciples of the Nazarene. As for Saul, upon leaving the synagogue, he went to see Ananias, anxious for his caring advice. The wise old man listened to his account of what had happened and approved the posture he had assumed. I know the master condemned arguing and never associated with contentious persons, Saul stated finally. But he also never gave in to evil. I am ready to repair my wrongful past. I shall face the incomprehension of Jerusalem in order to witness to my radical transformation. I shall ask the forgiveness of those I harmed in the foolishness of my ignorance, but in no way shall I pass the opportunity to prove myself sincere and truthful. Would I be serving the Master by bowing my head to lower ideals? Jesus struggled against them, and as much as possible, and his disciples cannot do otherwise. The kind old man nodded as he listened to what Saul was saying. After reassuring him of his approval, he advised him to be very careful. It would be better to leave his hideout as soon as possible. The Jews in Damascus knew the part Ananias had played in healing Saul, and because of it, he often had to endure their insults and scorn. They would certainly come looking for Saul there in order to arrest him. He thus suggested that Saul should go to the house of a sister in faith, a washerwoman. They used to pray and study the gospel there, and she would receive him kindly. Saul accepted the advice without hesitation. Within 3 hours, old Ananias was sought out and interrogated. Because of his tight-lipped behavior, he was taken to prison and for further questioning. When interrogated by the religious authorities, he would reply only, Saul must be with Jesus. Within the scruples of his conscience, he felt that in this way he was neither lying to men nor compromising a loyal friend. He was imprisoned and denied the means or right to communicate for 24 hours, and was then released after suffering 20 blows with a cudgel, leaving his face and hands badly hurt. As soon as he was free, however, he waited for nightfall and cautiously went to the humble hovel where the way sermons were delivered. Meeting his friend again, Ananias told him the plan he had come up with to remedy the situation. When I was a child, said Ananias cheerfully, I watched the men escape over the walls of Jerusalem, as if remembering the smallest details of an incident in his tired memory. He asked, Saul, would you be afraid of escaping in a wicker basket? Why would I be? He asked, smiling. He answered, smiling. Didn't Moses begin his life in a basket upon the waters? The old man was pleased with the comparison and revealed his plan. Tall trees stood next to the city walls, not far from there. They would lift the fugitive in a large basket, and then, without much effort, he could be let down on the other side, ready to begin his journey to Jerusalem as he intended. The former rabbi felt immense joy. That very hour, the washerwoman went to fetch three reliable brothers to help him with the plan. And when the sky became darker shortly after midnight, a small group met next to the wall at a point far away from the center of the city. Saul kissed Ananias' hands, nearly in tears. He whispered a goodbye to his friends, while one of them gave him a large pack of barley cakes. Near the top of a leafy dark tree, the youngest of the brothers awaited the signal. Saul got into his improvised vessel and escaped in the middle of the silent night. Once on the other side, Saul quickly climbed out of the basket, beset by strange thoughts. Did he really have to escape like this? He had not committed any crime. Would he not be a coward by refusing to appear before the civil authorities to explain himself? At the same time, he considered the fact that his behavior had not resulted from puerile or lower sentiments. After all, he was going boldly to Jerusalem to seek out his former colleagues and talk to them openly. Thus, he concluded that it would be not reasonable to surrender defenseless to the tyrannical fanaticism of the Damascus synagogue. The fugitive was far away by daybreak. With him, he had the barley cakes as his only provision and the gospel given to him by Gamaliel as a remembrance of his long time of solitude and struggle. The journey was quite difficult and arduous. He was compelled to stop many times because of fatigue. More than once on the hard trip he had to turn the charity of others. The travel from Damascus to Jerusalem by camel, horse, or dromedary took no less than a week of exhausting riding. Saul, however, was on foot. He could perhaps join up with some caravan where he could get the resources he needed, but he preferred to acquaint his powerful will with the hardest obstacles. Whenever fatigue suggested that he wait for help of others, to arrive he would try to overcome his discouragement and get up again, supported by an improvised walking stick. After the fond remembrances experienced in the place where he had the glorious visions of the resurrected Messiah, he had he again had tender emotions of entering Palestine, slowly crossing the extensive regions of Galilee. He made it a point of getting to know the theater of the Master's first struggles, to identify himself with the most enduring landscape, to visit Capernaum and Nazareth, and to listen to the natives of the region. At the same at that time, the ardent apostle to the Gentiles already wanted to get to know all the facts regarding the life of Jesus, anxious to coordinate them accurately so as to give his brothers and sisters in humanity the best repository of information of the divine emissary. When he arrived in Capernaum, a golden sunset cast an enchanting light over the bucolic countryside. The former rabbi walked down reverently to the shores of the lake. He became enraptured by and as he contemplated the lapping waters, thinking of Jesus, of the power of his love. He wept, overcome by a singular emotion. He wished he had been a humble fisherman in order to receive the sublime teachings at the source of his kind and immortal words. Saul stayed there for 2 days in gentle rapture. Without revealing who he was, he looked for Levi, who welcomed him with delight. Saul revealed his love and knowledge of the gospel, and spoke of the possibility of making a few notes. The son of Alphaeus was happy, and he listened to those intelligent and comforting words. In Capernaum, Saul spent marvelous hours of delight for his emotive spirit. He went to the place where the Master used to preach. A little further down was Peter's simple house, and then the tax collector's. the tax collector's office, where the master had called Levi to carry out an important role among the apostles. He embraced hale and hardy men who had been blind and leprous, healed by the merciful hands of the Messiah. He went to Dalmanuta, where he met where he met Mary Magdalene. He enriched the impressive extent of his observations with the gathering of new information. A few days after having rested in Nazareth, Saul was at the gates of the holy city of the Israelites, exhausted and fatigued from the long and arduous walk, from the sleepless nights whose sufferings often seemed endless. In Jerusalem, however, other no less painful surprises awaited him. He was gripped by anxious questions. He had not heard any news regarding his parents, friends, loving sister, or relatives, all whom he had kept alive in his memory. How would those who had been his truest colleagues receive him? He could not expect an affable reception from the Sanhedrin. The episode in Damascus had given him to understand the state of mind of the members of the tribunal. Obviously, he had been summarily expelled from the most prominent theater of the Jewish people. On the other hand, he had been admitted by Christ to the infinite realm of the eternal truth. He was dominated by these thoughts, and as he passed through the city to the city gate, while remembering the times when, in a speedy chariot, he had headed for Joppa to visit Zechariah's house, the memories of the most fortunate times of his youth filled with eyes filled his eyes with tears. The passers-by in Jerusalem could not possibly have imagined who that lean and pale man was with his long beard and sunken eyes, stumbling wearily along. After much effort, he reached a familiar house. His heart beat quickly. Like a simple beggar, he knocked at the door in anxious expectation. A stern-looking man answered dryly, "Could you please tell me," Saul asked humbly, "if a woman named Delilah still lives here?" "No," the man answered gruffly. His hard look did not encourage further questions. But even so, Saul ventured, "Could you perchance tell me where she has moved to?" "Since when," asked the man irately, "do I have to account to a beggar? Soon you will be asking me if I bought this house, if then I'll ask, and then you will ask me the price, the mandate, and ask for more information on the former residents. You will waste my time and with 1,000 idle questions." And looking at Saul impatiently, he ended bluntly, "I don't know anything. You hear? Get lost." The fugitive of Damascus returned calmly to the street, while the man expressed his ill temper by slamming the door. Gamaliel's former pupil reflected on the bitter reality of his reception. Obviously, Jerusalem would no longer recognize him. In spite of his poignant thoughts, he would not let himself be overcome with discouragement. He decided to look up Alexander, a relative of Caiaphas and his colleague at the Sanhedrin and Temple. Very tired, he knocked at the door with little hope. After the first question, a servant came back to tell him that the master would see him right away. In fact, Alexander received the stranger with undisguised surprise. That's Norah now.
All right, dear friends. So let us continue. So this part is just basically the dialogue between Alexander and Saul. Um, it says here that of course Alexander opened the door and greeted him, but there was still this displeased nature about him, and he asked, uh, "You really don't recognize me, right?" Saul asked Alexander, and Alexander was like, "You seem familiar, but..." And then Saul's like, "Alexander, have you forgotten about Saul?" So Alexander embraces him and it's like, "Oh, thank God, I see you have healed. I wasn't wrong to hope for your return. Great is the power of God of Moses." So then here, and I think I'm gonna have to open up this just a slide, dear friends. I cannot, I can't read. It says here, Saul immediately understood the ambiguity of these words. Perceiving how difficult it would be to make himself understood, he searched for the best way to explain himself, right? And so Alexander's like, "So you look like a Bedouin of the desert. Tell me, how long did this stubborn illness last?" Saul worked up his nerve and emphasized, "Well, there's a mistake. You haven't been well informed. I was never sick to begin with." And so Alexander seemed a little bit displeased about this and says, "Well, FYI, Jerusalem is full of stories about you. There's all sorts of things. And as a matter of fact," he says, "I have fought desperately for the terms of the warrant to be changed. I proved that if you had adopted a sympathetic attitude towards the people of the way, your decision was obviously based on reasons that were not to be able to understand immediately, such as better to probe the extent of the revolutionary activities," right? And so Saul is like, he couldn't contain himself. It's like, "I don't think so. I would be a hypocrite." So that's not what's happened at all. And so Alexander was still very frustrated. It says, "I considered all the hypotheses, and since I couldn't take you for a hypocrite, I succeeded in proving that your attitude in Damascus was the result of temporary insanity. It wouldn't be right to think otherwise, or else you would have been untrue to the circle of the Pharisee. I can't say that word, Pharisaism, right?" And so Saul was very cautious about this. He realized that Saul's religious concepts have been renewed, but Alexander was his friend. So while um, many had forsaken him at that moment, Alexander had received him as a brother. So he was very careful not to offend him. Nonetheless, it was impossible to hide the truth. And so this next part is like um, a really important part because it's going to really come and tell us that like it's almost like they're so connected, but yet because of the beliefs there's some disconnect. So let us go back to this. It says here, um "Alexander," he said humbly, "it is true that I initiated the great persecution of the way, but now I must confess I was wrong. The Galilean apostles were right. We are on the threshold of great changes at the gates of Damascus. Jesus appeared to me in his glorious resurrection and exhorted me to serve the gospel of love." And it's beautiful how Emmanuel, as the narrator, says how that Saul didn't want to hurt Alexander's feelings or be beliefs or disrespect, but obviously, no matter how nicely he was trying to tell him his truth, the truth, right? Alexander was still very displeased. "Do not voice such absurdities," he exclaimed with a sarcastic smile. "Unfortunately, I see that the illness continues to undermine both you and your physical strength." And so Saul was like, nevertheless, Alexander, I must insist on this truth. I saw the Messiah from Nazareth with my own eyes. I heard the words of his loving voice, understanding the errors of my ways and my defective ideas about faith. I went into the desert. I lived there for 3 years, doing hard work and meditating at length. My conviction is not superficial. Today, I believe that Jesus is the Savior and the Son of the living God. And Alexander continued, your illness has upset you. And this next part, dear friends, is very emotional because now Alexander is going to try to take control and manipulate this conversation and use something that Saul would touch Saul's heart. And he says, have you thought about your family? Ever since all of this, we've heard about your illness or your being out there, you've affected your family. Your mom has died, and your father, who had so much pride in you and teaching you, is now so depressed. He's unhappy. He's distraught. And so, doesn't that picture pain you? And so, here's Alexander again trying to, like, take the upper hand. And Saul, of course, Saul felt, and Emmanuel tells us here in a smart description that there was this anguish in his heart, this pain that came inside of him just thinking about all of this. He knew that, that because of him, in this idea, his family had fallen apart, right? And it's so interesting. He says his friends had fallen apart. His mother was dead. Excuse me, his family had fallen apart. His mother was dead. His father unhappy. His friends hated him. Jerusalem mocked him. Nevertheless, this is so beautiful because we come here and it says that Saul was, and we have to think about this, friends. We've been reading the book. He was being prepared. His answer at this point should not be surprising for us any longer. There's a lot of spiritual maturity. I'm sorry for such sad consequences, and God is my witness, I did not mean for this to happen. However, according to the old law, even those who have not yet accepted the gospel should understand that we must not be proud. Despite the force of his commandments, Moses taught goodness. The prophets were succeeded him, were emissaries of profound message for our souls, which had become lost in iniquity. Almost urged us to search for the Lord so that we might live. I am sorry that my loved ones feel offended, but we must remember that before listening to any idle worldly judgment, we must seek the judgment of God. So, again, this is powerful. Of course, Alexander was not going to be happy. He's like, do you mean to persist in your error? And Saul says, I do not feel I'm in error. I am too in pain in the situation, but the master will not withhold from me, right? I know that I have this aid, and thinking about how he just mentioned before about Moses, and thinking about all these prophets too that had to commit to to Jesus and have had to share the truth. But of course, it came with the sacrifice of family. Thinking of Moses and the chosen people, they too doubted, and this whole time we read in the Bible, they were constantly whining and complaining and not believing that they were going to be set free. So imagine the pressures that Moses had at that time. And yet Saul used that to inspire himself and remember that he had a special, very special mission. What was beautiful too is that he quotes the Bible here and says, he remembered this part in the Bible, the rich in the kingdom of God. And basically, just to paraphrase here, a man comes up to Jesus and asks him, "Why do you ask? Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied, "And there is only one good. If you want to enter, keep the commandments." So Jesus says the commandments, and the man continues to reply, "Well, what if I have kept all these commandments? What do I still lack?" So Jesus answers, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come and follow me. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. Then Jesus said, I truly, I'm gonna zoom in because this is really good. Truly tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of needles than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. So then, when the disciples heard this, they were astonished. So then, who can be saved? Jesus looked at them and said, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. So he's at that level as he's talking to Alexander, right? Saying, like, this is where I need to keep true to this. There's a reason for this. I know this. And so, Alexander insists, you're still disturbed. You're a madman. And, Saul was like, well, Gamaliel wasn't, right? What's the difference? And Alexander's like, I don't believe any of that you're saying. Saul looked down in silence. He felt greatly humiliated, right, by this situation. And just to finish off this, it is important um, to see how Saul too was very intuitive in this conversation, because he was already feeling, Alexander kind of sends him off and says, I'm here for you, Saul, but just know that I'm here at your disposal should you decide to change your attitude. And our part ends by Saul understood the warning. There was no need to prolong the conversation. With good manners, his friend was throwing him out. So it was definitely a beautiful conversation. It was hard, powerful, but beautiful, because I think in this one we really saw Saul's spiritual maturity, what that those 3 years at the desert it did, the way he responded. So I do have a couple of comments on that part, but I know, just to give us a break, we can go back to your part, brother.
Beautiful, dear. This part of the book is really interesting because we see a man that was still thinking that he could go back home and find something good. And when he does go back to the place where he had friends and family, he just finds all people very willingly to throw their backs to him. This is very, very interesting because a couple of times we do have to assume and realize and recognize that um, in a couple of dark moments in life, we are going to be alone. There is a book that was psychographed by Chico Xavier, and when I was studying this part that we are exposing tonight, I really remember that part of the book. The book is Good News. I think Vanessa translated it as Good News. I think she was the person who translated the book to English. I think that's the title that she used. Here in Brazil, it's very famous. Its name is Boa Nova. It's a very famous book. It's a great
Beautiful.
book. In this book, there's a chapter where we see that very important moment of the gospel. It's a very important moment where we see Jesus calling John, Peter, and James. That's his name in English. It's very different in Portuguese because in Portuguese it's Tiago. It's very different, but in English it's James. Jesus called them three in that very harsh moment where Jesus is about to face the hardest things that he had to face, and he calls them to pray with him, and then we see that they fall asleep.
Mm,
All three, they can't be awake for some reason that at that moment they could not understand. They couldn't be awake, and after a while in this book, Good News, we see that John the evangelist, he was feeling very, very guilty, and he couldn't forget that. He couldn't forgive himself for having slept at that very difficult moment where Jesus needed him the most. And there's a beautiful moment, and we're very thankful for Chico Xavier's mediumistic work for bringing us this type of information, because the books brings us a very nice explanation. Jesus, when John is sleeping, appears to him, and he tells him that he could not be awake. That was the purpose of that sleep. He could not be awake. And Jesus tells him that they all had to sleep so Jesus would be alone in that very hard moment. And then he explains that in these very crucial moments, and they are dark and they're painful, we have to face them alone. That's the lesson that Jesus brings John. And he tells him, don't feel that you are guilty of anything, because you're not. That you guys sleeping, that was the purpose of that night. And we see Saul of Tarsus feeling very much alone, because he was trying to get something out of everybody that he knew before, and he's not getting that. But at the same time, in this part of the book, we see, and we're going to see other moments in which the situation will become very different. But in this part of the moment, we see, and we started tonight's study talking about that, we see that he was feeling already that he was being accompanied by spiritual forces. And as we've talked before about that, and the title of the book is Paul and Stephen. We know, and we've talked about that tonight, that it was Stephen. But this going alone in some dark and harsh pathways, it has a very important purpose in when it comes to spirits that need to evolve and need to take what is on their plate and deal with it. That's what we're seeing with Saul of Tarsus. Another thing, when Norah and Daniel, in these parts that you guys read, and we see that Saul of Tarsus, he was starting to understand that he had a duty, a very important one, and and he's starting to realize that that's the reason why he couldn't be weak to any of that implications that those people were bringing him. And we have a very important text about the duty that we have as Christians in the gospel according to Spiritism. And I know that we are already in 15 minutes of conversation here, but I do think this text is important. I'm going to read it, okay? It's in the instructions from the spirits in the gospel according to Spiritism. The title of the lesson is Duty. The text brings us this. Duty is a moral obligation, firstly to ourselves and then to others. Duty is a law of life encountered in the smallest details as well as in the most elevated acts. Now I wish to speak only of moral duty and not of that duty which refers to the professions. Within the order of sentiments, duty is a very difficult one to fulfill because it finds itself in antagonism with the seductions of interest and of the heart. And we see that that's exactly what Saul of Tarsus was going through. Its victories have no witness, and its failures suffer no repressions. Man's intimate duty is left to his free will. The pressure of man's conscience, this guardian of interior integrity, alerts and sustains him, but shows itself frequently impotent against the deceptions of passion. Duty of the heart, when faithfully observed, elevates man, but how can we define it with exactitude? Where does duty begin? Where does it end? Duty begins exactly at the point where the happiness or tranquility of our neighbor is threatened, and therefore terminates at the limit we would not wish to be passed in relation to ourselves. I will stop here. This is very important because we are seeing a man that is starting to realize that all those precepts that he held before, and we're talking about Pharisaism here, and we see that people, especially Christians in this sense, they're starting to mix things, and he feels like his duty is to trace this limit, and we're going to see all those limits because they're multiple, and we're going to see this man carry out every single thing that he has to do, feeling this duty in his heart because he's honest to Christ and he does want to fulfill whatever he was called for. I have another text that I want to read in tonight's study, but I want you guys to present your comments first.
I have something real quick. So how can I add this to the stream? Oh, I don't know if I'll be able to add it. Yeah. Let me see if I can. You want to say something? I don't know what happened to.
It's a slide. Do you want to present? Okay,
Yes,
it
I do
works.
want to present. I don't know. The colors changed.
Oh,
So, oh my gosh! But it's just for us to see at least the picture here. In the messengers, chapter 9. There's actually a couple of case studies. This is a part where Andre Luis goes to this school, and there's a brothers and sisters who are kind of they're talking about what happened when they were incarnate. Now they're discarnate. There's like a life review, and there's a case here where a sister Mariana and also an older gentleman were saying that they knew they had to do the work. You know how you mentioned the work, and it says there that I lacked support from my wife, and I needed my wife, but I didn't realize that her company was kind of taking me away from where I'm supposed to be. And so he says here, I forgot that the good servant must be prepared to serve the Lord in any circumstance, which is what you're saying. Sometimes it's alone, sometimes we're in a relationship, sometimes we're not. And Saul was having that. And this other one, it's too bad the color changed, but Mariana too, she said, I did as much as I could. I tried, but my husband wouldn't let me do the work. Even my daughter, he tried to turn my daughters away from me. So I just stopped. But what was beautiful was the response that the guides gave to her at that moment that Andre tells, right? It says, perhaps you could have won the understanding of your husband and the affectionate cooperation of your daughters if you worked in silence, therefore demonstrating your sincere willingness to make a sacrifice. Our acts, Mariana, are more contagious than our words, which is kind of where maybe Saul is finding himself right now. He's at the threshold of his life and everything. It's like my family, it's all lost. And like he has choices too, just like these brothers and sisters, right? And if we go into the spirits book talking about joy, it seems like he's like, what is this joy? It's not, as we look at questions 920, 921, and 922, right? To remember that this happiness, it's not of this earth really. It's really to get those treasures in life, just kind of what Jesus said, right? With regard to material life, it's the possession what is necessary for survival. So Alexander was really thinking about this materialistic perspective, while here Saul in regard to his moral life, which is the possession of a good conscience and the belief in a future life. So it is absolutely beautiful and profound to see how we're starting to see the bigger picture. And what's beautiful, it's not what he's going through. He went through it a long time ago. We see this in under books, but how many of us to today we have family members, friends, individuals, whatever, even co-workers, whatever, they don't understand what this is. And we have to somehow be that servant, be that Christian, that spiritual being, that light, and keep moving forward, understanding that we're here to work those moral stuff. So anyway, thank you, friends. This was my comments for the evening.
Thank you, dear.
Oh my gosh, the word wouldn't come out.
Thank you, dear. Bro, do you have something to say?
Yes, I found so interesting the part about the long walks that uh, we read about not only Saul of Tarsus but so many disciples. They they all push themselves to the limit, believing in something. It's such a strong belief that they push themselves nearly to death. You know, that's from Capernaum to Damascus, it's 160 miles. And from Capernaum to um, Jerusalem, it's 120 miles. So that's your feet are hurting. Uh, he probably bruised his whole body, uh, pain all over his body, and many doubts on his mind. And he keeps walking. He's always going and believing. He doesn't know what to do, and he's hurting. He wants to rest. He wants to sleep, but he keeps walking and just believing. And that's such an interesting thing because not only the bodily pain, but um, if we think with empathy for these guys, leaving behind our whole life and our dreams, it's not easy. We feel um, so much fear of what's coming. We don't have, we lose control of our own destiny. You know, they deliver themselves to the belief in the gospel. That's huge. We can only imagine how strong this is. In thinking about that, I remember the inner voice that we all have. It's like a trigger that prevents us from harming ourselves, uh, from kind of walking too much under the sun or lifting uh, uh, um, a weight too big for us, you know. But in a situation of despair or mental disorder, you have that strength to move large weights, to run faster, to jump higher. And, you know, outside that, those guys were not in despair and they were not in mental disorder, despite despite of what Alexander said. So they were deciding to push themselves uh, further. And I thought how that can be possible. How they may get so far. And this is a proof of the power of two things: reincarnatory planning. You know, before we reincarnate, we decide things, and we can't relate those decisions, that planning, to the moments which we spent awake in our bodies, because the spirit is is caged, like blind and deaf. We don't know anything uh, about spiritual life. All that we are studying here is tiny bit of portion that of what there is in the spiritual dimension. And that's the power of reincarnatory planning. We deciding that's a strong resolution we take to our lives and to our decisions, and plus the spiritual influence for the bad and for the good. So we have this uh, like an antenna, like we can, like a radio that we can adjust to some frequencies. So if you adjust to bad things, you will have the bad influence. So you adjust your actions to good things, you will have the good influence. And we see here the power of spiritual influence, because every time we talk about spiritual influence, we talk about the bad influence, the ones that make us suffer and make us sick, and we all fear that, and we must dodge that kind of influence. And that's not the case. The good influence is probably even more powerful than the bad influence. Their resolution, um, their intelligence, and the importance of their planning in in a spiritual dimension is so big that uh, makes possible this spiritual, and all these actions come so, it's amazing. If we try to put ourselves in their place, it's uncanny.
Great, bro. This is great. I totally agree with you. And you brought something that really called my attention because I really do agree with that. I do think that we as spiritists and in the spiritist community, we do spend more time thinking about bad influences than about those good influences. And as the spirit's book brings us the better and only way to get away from the evil and bad spirits is to be more attached and closer to the good spirits. So that's the way. When Nora was talking, I remember, and when she was saying that as spiritists, we a couple of times have to face these situations in where we have to explain ourselves, because people will ask us about changes that we are showing them or that they are perceiving in our actions. And there's a very, I just remembered, we were in a mediumistic reunion a couple of weeks ago, and we received from a very nice spirit a Bible verse that brings exactly this text and is so substantial and significant in tonight's study. It's in Peter, it's in the Gospel in Peter. Um, it's the first epistle written by Peter, chapter 15, um, no, chapter 3, verse 15. Um, Peter says this: "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." This is exactly what we're seeing with Saul Tarsus, because they were thinking he was mad and that he had gone crazy, and that was not the case. He was just full of hope. And of course, for those that are really immersed in materialism, it's really harsh to think why people that are suffering so much are still carrying that amount of hope, guys. And to finish here, and but of course you guys can bring comments before, but to finish my part, there is a book that was psychographed by Chico Xavier in New York. Chico was in New York for 6 months, and he psychographed a book whose title is "The World of Spirit." This book was received in English. It's not translated. This is a very interesting book. And when in my first part, when I was reading and reflecting about Saul of Tarsus in the Sanhedrin, having to face those very cruel men and full of pride and vanity, um, I do think that in a situation like that, we have to choose between showing our light, our inner light, or not showing it. And there is a text in this book, "The World of Spirit," that has this title exactly about what we were reflecting tonight, and I'm going to read it. The title is "Don't Be Afraid to Let Your Light Shine Forth." Here's the text. Yes, he was accused of a crime and had been imprisoned by men. There was every indication that in that facial expression beauty had fled. Hard and irregular features, dull, colorless complexion, hair sparse and uncombed, face furrowed by deep wrinkles, eyes dulled by hidden desperation, nose hooked and unshapely, mouth with contracted lips, Pro- protruding jawbones, air of sadness and gloom. He totters as he walks, an unhappy picture. Suddenly, however, the man smiles, and a breath of attractiveness revitalizes his appearance. His entire appearance takes a turn for the better, as if a powerful inner torch had unexpectedly been ignited. He was no longer the same man. He no longer looked like a criminal. Friend, have you ever observed the revitalizing effect of a smile? A smile is the soul's ray of light, and the light, even in the abscess, is always the splendor from on high overcoming the darkness. Don't refuse the gift of a smile to anyone. A smile in the midst of difficulties. A smile in the midst of struggle. A smile in the face of sorrow. Your soul is a divine sun. Don't be afraid to let it shine forth. I found this so beautiful, and it really represents those first Christians. I'm really happy with tonight's study. But before we finish, I want to ask you guys if you have anything else to say.
No, but it reminds us of the song that this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And that's how I came to Cardiac Radio. Vanessa would sing
The
that song.
woman can sing.
But Vanessa would sing that song every day. I was like, oh, how sweet. It's such a sweet song. But it's, we do got to let our light shine and let's just have that trust that everything will be fine. Look into our hearts, have that intuition, like Daniel said, and you as well, brother. If we hold on to those good energies, to that good vibration, we will be led to places. So it was definitely a beautiful, beautiful beginning of the chapter. I think this is a long chapter. So far it's amazing. So that's yeah.
Thank you, dear, so much, bro.
No, thanks, guys. Always a pleasure to meet you and we studied together. So nice. Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys so much. I am the one who have to say thanks here because I learned so much with you guys, learning so much from all these studies. Thank you guys so much. Thank everybody that's here with us, that's watching with us, that's watching on demand. You guys are awesome, and we have received your messages. Thank you so much. We're going to be here next week. Bye bye.